Alright guys, HyDra again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. Atlanta FaZe win Major 2 in Dallas with many teams falling far short of their own expectations. It's over halfway through the season now. There are no more minors and the qualifier runs coming forwards are actually 5 qualifiers instead of 7. That means that if teams need to turn it around, now is the time they have to do so. Roster changes are definitely on the agenda for some of these teams. Big Rostermania talk last night. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into as always. Some highlights, shall we say, of last night, right? So there was this, they did this last year at a different venue, the OpTic like after party thing that they did. This was later than I was there. I was off by, just about this time actually, I think. And here's aBeZy enjoying the aBeZy Where's the Vlog. So I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, great time. Thanks to Hilton and everyone for hosting it. As always, they do a phenomenal job. And as Kremp was there, and he said this dude aBeZy wins tournaments and shows up to the after party at Lululemon's. Yeah, all the FaZe guys were there. I don't think I saw any of the Thieves guys. Most of the teams at least had some representation last night, which I thought was nice. I mean, it's the same kind of story as what it typically is, as it was last year as well. The event's up in Allen, head down to Dallas for the final night, and these are a couple of cold shots as well here. So Ryan was there, and we got Muddy B, we got Donny Temp. This shot, I actually recognise him in the background of this one, and also this one as well. So I just thought I'd share it, who knows, because Kenny was there, and I thought it was nice to see Kenny obviously out in force as well. His Pomage in the background. This is Shorstin, of course, and this is me with Kremp. So we were having a chat in the background about all sorts of stuff. But it was a good time as always, and it was nice to see Kenny there as well, really, given obviously what's happened over the last couple of days with the OpTic changes. Pretty much all the OpTic boys, I think, were there at least at some point last night. So, it was nice to see everyone still kind of on the same page, despite the fact that, things changing around behind the scenes, as they always are here in Call of Duty. Now, there was a bit of trash talk, not necessarily last night, but, well, there was on the main stage. Drazah making it clear that, wow, they didn't win a map in the grand finals. What's that all about, right? And I think that Surge know that they're good enough to, look, they could have beat them in the winners finals. In the grand finals, FaZe, have found a way to actually win them now in the finals. The Silver Surfer era is most definitely over. And, they're rapidly gaining a legacy here, really, FaZe, for what they're achieving now. Look, does Simp still need to have a higher win percentage in grand finals before he really gets into the absolute best player of all time conversation? In my opinion, yes, but it's getting, it's getting increasingly competitive up there, shall we say, because they're finally finding a way to win finals. I think that Surge will be back and potentially stronger too. Like, obviously, it's a long tournament. At the end of the day, they had to make the losers bracket run, and I think you tend to find, it was probably more so a thing back in the day, but the teams making the losers run out of steam a little bit towards the grand finals. Often that can end up being the case. And I think that it was probably true here to some degree that FaZe just steamrolled them in the end. And Drazah was like, look, I'm looking for a challenge, right? Like, nobody else is going to gun me right now. Surge were obviously putting up a fight earlier in the tournament, and they've done so online. But when it mattered in the finals, it was a 4-0. Who could have beaten FaZe in the finals? I think Thieves were the team with the only best chance of actually making that happen, because, none of the other contenders are really well positioned right now. And that is the story of the day in terms of which teams, if any, well, certainly some, need to make a serious change. Whether Surge can go further is a question in the future, because as Octane says, I'm happy that they're the real deal. It is great to see at least some team kind of coming out of nowhere. The fact that they made a one-man change and the team has clicked and really kicked on to the next gear, I think it's actually a really cool story as well for the league, because often we think, well, if you really want to make a stride as a team, you might need to make a two-man change, but it can prove that, you bring the right guy in at the right time, as they've done with Neptune, and it's really elevated their team. And it's interesting to think about, right? They had other options on the table. They could have got Hook. There was even talk that maybe Hook turned the offer down, and then Neptune, they got Neptune instead, because when they were signing Nep, that's when Hook was available from OpTic. So at least it was in the conversation that they had to have. I'm not sure that they necessarily chose Neptune over Hook, or whether Hook didn't choose to go back, who knows. But could have been a mistake in hindsight if that's true, but regardless, Neptune gets on the team, and he's been absolutely cooking over the last few weeks, and he continued that story on LAN as well. So Surge are going to continue to be a force, there's no doubt, but I'm sure that there's other teams out there thinking and looking at that team and saying, look, they're a great team, obviously, with Neptune, Nastie, 04, and Abuzah, but there's definitely other teams out there that will think, look, we could easily be that good if we lock in, and maybe it's time for some of these teams to make a change to make that actually happen. aBeZy says they hit the three-peat, of course, right, FaZe. It's been a very long time since anyone's ever done that. The Dynasty did it on a number of occasions, but even the FaZe Dynasty, if you want to call them that now, and certainly it is the FaZe era. Like, it's always been the FaZe era. For the last, 5 years, we've been living in the FaZe era, where every tournament you attend, they always feel like the favourites. And now they're at a point where they're actually capitalising on that. I mean, it's kind of crazy that Major 2, FaZe love Major 2. I think they've made the finals every time. In Cold War, when the Major cycle first became a thing, it was online and they lost to Toronto in the finals. The next year in Vanguard, they lost to Gorillas in the finals, but they made the finals. And the last 3 years in a row, MW2, they won it with Slasher. MW3, they won it in Miami with Drazah, and they've won it again this year in Dallas. So, the second major of the year definitely seems to go well for FaZe, but the fact that they're already 2 for 2 on the year is certainly a talking point, right? Because, we kind of wondered a couple of years ago, is it really possible for any team to do a clean sweep? Well, they've got the first 2 pieces done, and they won EWC last year as well. So, look, it won't last forever. It never does. But I think it should be inspirational anyway to some of the other teams to say, look, FaZe aren't just going to bowl over, roll over in the grand finals like they have typically done before. They're now going to be a force, all weekend, as every team knows. But FaZe came into this tournament and executed their game plan, and they won a very impressive run. And as Kenny says, congrats, boys, hell of a tournament. And Kenny says, look, chill out on the wins. You are catching up a little bit too quick. But I certainly think Kenny wants to come back in. I mean, I think even Shotzzy and Kenny himself made that pretty clear when Kenny stepped away and he did the kind of, the tweet announcing that he was going to be off the team. And as he said, this is to be expected, Sam, but I've got to get back to where I want to be. This ain't the end, he said at the time. And so I think it's pretty clear that he does want to come back. And I guess the real question is whether there are teams right now that would want Kenny and would want to make that happen right now. Whether that would make the most sense is a big question for, both parties, really, as to whether Kenny wants to come back, at least to the teams that might potentially want him, but also whether teams should get Kenny just because he had a horrific end to his stint on OpTic. But I think that, ball knowers out there at least recognise that Kenny can still be a very valuable piece to a team, and I think he will be in the future. They're just, whatever was happening in OpTic, there was clearly out-of-game stuff that was affecting his performance to a great extent because, it's difficult to comprehend how a player with that talent goes from, winning all these events and having legendary performances to dropping point threes. It's just something that doesn't happen unless there are extenuating circumstances. Not to say that Kenny, needed to play a lot better, because obviously he did, but I think that the environment definitely played a part in Kenny's fall off most recently. There was a bit of talk about the fact that, FaZe won, but, how many home events have they had? I mean, there was one Atlanta event in MW19, but, that's a very long time ago. FaZe are always the villains, pretty much whatever event they turn up to, right? And it's not like FaZe have, run an event as an organisation, which I think many would be hoping for. When you've got a team this good, you might expect Atlanta Esports Ventures to host an event in Atlanta. Now, I maybe understand why it doesn't make much sense for some of these organisations to do so, but the CDL do subsidise running these tournaments, so you'd have thought it might have happened. And Los Angeles Thieves as well, I think, are in a similar conversation of maybe teams that need to lock in a bit in the future, especially if they're going to be as good or continue to be as good as we might have expected them to be. And Simp was talking about it as well. Lion asked him after the grand finals, look, do you think you can win everything this year? And he thinks, yeah, it's definitely possible, right? Not a lot of teams ever have done 3 in a row. They've now done that, including the World Cup. And then, they've got a couple of more tournaments to go, then the World Championship, then the World Cup again. So, look, this would be a run for Simp, a pretty legendary run. Look, I don't think they're going to go unchallenged. I definitely think the teams are going to, come on strong the second half of the season. And obviously, Surge, they took them Game 5, Round 11, and I think Thieves will be back and better in the future. But still, this is the type of run where Simp can start to turn around the legacy about the problem that he's had in terms of winning grand finals over the last several years. And as Clay says, no one can beat these guys. It's pathetic. I might have to come back into the ring. So, I think Clay's confident that if himself or if, someone like Scump, for example, picked up the sticks again, give it a couple of weeks, they'd be back in a pretty good spot. The players that know the game, that understand the game, they're well positioned. Of course, if they wanted to, right, and that is the question with regard to the roster changes we're about to get into, because, could Clay's team be getting involved in this type of stuff? That is a talking point. Because Clay's team, the Falcons, of course, they got bopped out of the first round, as is relatively often the case. FaZe won the 4-0 grand finals. These are therefore the current standings in the CDL. CDL. So FaZe is sitting pretty at 330, Thieves are second at 270, those are the two clear front runners. Toronto take over third spot at 210, Ravens at 190, Surge at 185, and then there's a big gap. So, right now I think there's a quite clear top 4 teams in the game, and it's these 4 with the exception of the Ravens, who, when their Search and Destroy wasn't on this event, they couldn't make the run. I still kind of rate them, but, I don't think they're, frankly, good enough to really compete on a Sunday as it stands. Cloud9, maybe even they could be in the conversation. They're down here in 9th, but they're making some good progress. The question is, if you're any of these teams, what do you do? What changes do you look to make? Because, Gentlemates, I mean, they obviously should make a change. I think they will make a change, but realistically, their World Championship ambitions are chalked up. Like, there's no way they're going to be making it. Same story for Falcons, but for those guys, it's kind of so bad that you probably have to make a move. Cloud9 are in an interesting position where they're on the bubble of making it into the World Championships, but they probably are going to do it on their current trajectory, right? So I think for C9, maybe they could improve, but if they did make a change to try and improve, it may backfire, and, they may not make champs, whereas right now they're on a good enough trajectory, I think, given the points they've accrued recently to make it to the World Championship. Miami, I mean, look, there's Eric Boom out there, there's Super out there, there's other Spanish players that they probably should be trying at this point because they didn't have a good tournament. But obviously all they played was a defeat to the Thieves in the first round of losers. So they may say, oh, well, it is what it is. Boston, look, could they improve? Possibly, but it's also very difficult to decide what you would do because, you've got Cammy and Wake, who both played pretty well this tournament, and then Purge and Snoopy, who look like a great SMG duo, right? So it's like, if there was one clear AR that you'd upgrade, then maybe you'd do it, but right now there's not really. OpTic, look, if what Donny Temp said the other day may be true about them, let's just say the team is chalked, like they need a 2-man change, things behind the scenes aren't good, then sure, they may have to consider something else here, but they've only played a couple of series. So intrigued to your thoughts, because if I'm any of these teams, if I'm the Ravens, I'm thinking about a move right now, because, you're sitting pretty for champs, there's no issues about making the World Championship for Ravens, they are going to do it. But are you trying to make champs, or are you trying to go to the next level, right? Because they can make a change without much risk, I think, if, because they've earned that position at the start of the season, if they wanted to make a move. So something to think about anyway, because of the 12 teams, I think like half should probably change, and, we'll see how many actually do. Now, Jake Hale says, likely teams to change based off minimum or no intel at all. The Falcons are rumoured to be calling it a day with their roster, also to whom I think is, he has some family stuff going on. His father, I think, is unwell, so wishing him the best, but that may also inspire some degree of a change. I'm 99% sure that Rocker are making a change. I just don't think that Paul X stays on that team any longer at this point. Who they get, obviously there's questions. People have even thrown, Fellow obviously, but even Kenny into the mix. Whether Kenny would want to do it, I think that's another question, to be fair. Gentlemate, I don't really know if many players actually want to join, despite the fact that they can pay good money. If the player feels like the team is chalked, it's difficult for them to actually want to go there, and I think that might be the problem that they run into here. And then, of course, we've got other teams as well. It's not like, I don't think OpTic are going to get rid of Skies. It's more so a question of whether, they decide that things internally need another switch up. Who knows? I don't think that Skies is going to join and then be kicked out immediately. So maybe they just give it a bit more time. I think, you don't mention Ravens at all. I don't think they will make a change, but I think if I was in their position, I would at least consider it, despite the fact that they're looking pretty good. Lynz comes out with this kind of cryptic Neymar gif here. Not really sure what he's trying to get at. He might be saying thank you to the fans. Like, it was an implication anyway that maybe Lynz is gone, and this is kind of his goodbye. But massively intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Which teams are actually going to make a change after all of this drama? But hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.